Hi guys, so before we get into it, a quick disclaimer that there will be some spoilers today, even though this is a fairly new movie, although I'll try not to go overboard with the spoilers, if you can forgive the pun. But to be honest, once you know the premise of this film, it's very hard to be surprised by anything that happens. So this is a Shaun Byrne directed movie, it's his third. I've not seen the previous two, which were The Loved Ones and The Devil's Candy. I remember reading about The Loved Ones once, but I know nothing about the other film. So this was my first Shaun Byrne experience. It's essentially a film about a serial killer who owns his own cage diving business. So he operates out of the Gold Coast. He takes tourists out on this boat and he lets them have their cave diving experience. He gives them what they paid for, but then he kills them. Or at least he kills the guys because he's not interested in them. But the women he captures, puts them in the brig, and then later at night he brings them back out, ties them to this pulley type system, and then lowers them into the water so they can be slowly devoured by sharks while he's filming the whole thing on his dodgy VHS equipment. A dastardly way to kill women, and no mistake. Although I got a little bit tired of this modus operandi by the end of the movie because this killer doesn't mix it up at all. I kind of wish that he would get creative and give us different types of torturous kills throughout this, but no, he just wants to do the same thing over and over. Even if he just like flipped the victims the other way and dropped them in head first, that would have been something, but no, same thing every time. And I guess that's my first black mark on the movie. It won't be the last. The villain's name is Tucker, no relation to Tucker from Cliffhanger. And when you watch this guy in action, it's very hard not to be reminded of the killer from Wolf Creek, Mick Taylor. Both guys are Australian, both operate very much off the grid. Mick Taylor in the outback, Tucker at sea. And you watch a film like Dangerous Animals and it just brings it home how easy it would be to commit a murder and get away with it if you did it quite far away from civilization, because even in 2025 with all the modern surveillance tech, that stuff can't cover every last square inch of the planet. And in this film, Tucker makes several sloppy mistakes and he always gets away with it because he's at sea. He can be incompetent to a certain degree. They should make a spin-off, by the way, of Mick Taylor and Tucker. Maybe it could turn out that they're father and son. They could just call it Taylor and Tucker. It's got a ring to it. And then the second one would be Taylor and Tucker Kill Again. And then Taylor and Tucker Take Manhattan. That would be the best of the trilogy. They would get there on Tucker's boat. Tucker, by the way, is played by Courtney, an absolute orangutan of a man. This is an actor who holds the distinction of not only being in the worst Die Hard film, but also the worst Terminator film. And whilst I wouldn't call this the worst shark film I've ever seen, it's certainly not in the upper echelons of great shark films either. So I've definitely not gotten to see the best of this actor. So no doubt the next time I see him, it will be in like Children of the Corn 12 and he will reach even lower lows. Seeing the cage diving at the start made me think of 47 Meters Down because that movie begins with a cave diving expedition from memory. Although this film is actually more similar in its DNA to Dead Calm, that film from the early 90s with Sam Neill and Nicole Kidman. Very good film. I haven't seen it in quite a while, but that film is a lot more fluid in terms of its story. It feels more like a natural set of events, whereas Dangerous Animals is a lot more mechanical in its story writing. About halfway through this, I felt like I could see into the story writer's head. I could just envisage him sat there with his pen and paper, thinking to himself, right, I've got 45 minutes of content. Now, how do I get the protagonist out of her handcuffs again so that she can just be put back into the handcuffs 10 minutes later? Oh, I know, I'll have her swim away from the boat and then captured and brought back. That'll eat up another 10 minutes. There's a lot of that in this film, sadly, but I do like how it's been directed. There's a lot of stylish setups. My favourite is when somebody screams at one point and then we cut to outside the boat and the camera just pulls away and away and away. And it just keeps going till like the boat is just a little speck on the ocean. Little moments like that really impress me. I definitely watch this director again, even though I didn't think that this movie was amazing. I just feel like it would have been better as like a half an hour short, just get in there at the start, show the modus operandi, have somebody turn the tables, and then finish it nice and quick. But having to drag it out into a full-length feature film, all the different things that happen throughout the second half of this film, it does end up just stretching disbelief by the end of it. The two main protagonists are good, though. I would say that their relationship is the best thing about this movie. So their names are Zephyr and Moses. Now, I would bet good money that in the whole history of mankind, there has never been a couple with the names Zephyr and Moses. In fact, I would bet money that there's never even been a woman called Zephyr before. I'm glad that the two wet lettuces who start this film off don't end up becoming the main characters. So we have this prologue where we get to see Tucker doing his thing, and then we switch to our two mains, Zephyr and Moses. I can barely say their names with a straight face. Wasn't Moses a character in the Bible who had something to do with the Red Sea? I'm not a religious person, so I might have got that completely wrong, but there are plenty of times in this film where Moses is dripping blood from his wounds into the sea, therefore creating a Red Sea. Maybe I've stumbled onto something there, maybe not. But I like the exchanges between these two characters in the first half of the movie. Interestingly, both the couples in this film have only just gotten together after a one-night stand. I don't know what the film's trying to say with that, if anything. But in the case of Zephyr and Moses, I liked the fact that they've only just fallen in love in real time during this movie, because you sort of realize, obviously, that one or both of them might die, and it just adds to the sense of tragedy that they've not gotten to have a relationship yet, a proper relationship. This is why Titanic works so well, because you know that Jack and Rose have effectively fallen in love by the end of the film, and yet they might not ever get to even have one proper date. Now, if we go back to the horror film context, if you make it so that the main couple have already been together 10 years, then yes, it's sad that they might die. But at the same time, you're kind of thinking as well, you've gotten to have sex with her for 10 years, so suck it up and take your axe in the head like a man. Shit happens. As good as Zephyr and Moses are, unfortunately, Tucker really starts to wear my patience by the end of this film. They've tried to make him a personality killer, but with very mixed results. He does get a couple of good lines. So he does this baby shark thing towards the start, which I found really fun. And later on, he comes out with this line where he says something like, "Oh, what a love story. Shame I'm more into horror." I thought that was nice, but these are rare moments. For a lot of the film, he's annoying. And there's lots of tropes and cliches in this film that you will recognise from other movies. So we have the random character who stumbles across the action just to get killed like 2 seconds later. I call this a misery kill, named after the sheriff who gets his guts blown out about 2 seconds after stumbling across the killer's house in Misery. And we also get the cheesy one-liner said by the protagonist just before she's about to try and put the killer down for good. I won't tell you whether she succeeds in this case, but she tries to do the one-liner, where the rest of the audio goes silent just so that we can definitely hear the clever thing that she's going to say. A good example of this type of one-liner is in Jaws when Roy Schneider says, "Smile, you son of a bitch," and you would have seen it in like hundreds of films since then. Jaws might not have been the first, but it's one of the most famous examples. But the one-liner that Zephyr attempts is literally the worst I have ever heard. It's so bad. It doesn't even make sense that she would be saying this particular thing to Tucker, because what she's saying is like an in-joke that only Moses would understand. So why are you saying it to Tucker? Like, if you're about to kill the guy, potentially, then at least say something that he's going to understand in his final moments, not this. She might as well have just said, "Smile, you son of a bitch." There's also that cliche where the villain starts comparing himself to the person he's trying to kill and coming to the conclusion that essentially, deep down, they're the same. They're very similar when you think about it. The Joker does this a lot. Whenever he's confronting the Batman, he'll try and point out that the two characters are very much alike. One might be dark, one might be light, but underneath the surface, they are like shadowy reflections of each other. And in another life, the Batman could have been the villain and the Joker could have been the hero. All that crap. Like, Zephyr in this movie would have been easily justified putting on a Christian Bale voice and going, "We are nothing alike." And Tucker, for his part, could easily have done a speech in this film where he essentially goes, "I might be a psychopath who drops people into sharks' mouths. I might be completely unhinged, and you might be a completely sane person who lives an ordinary life and just goes surfing every day. But leaving all that aside, we're basically the same. In another life, we would have hung out together. They would have called us Tucker and Zephs. We would have been living in each other's pockets. We would have been finishing each other's sentences. Our souls basically would have been intertwined because we're the same, essentially. Deep down, we could have been like Siamese twins, and you know it. So just admit it. So it's time to wrap up, and in summary, I'd say that this is a film worth checking out. The villainy on display here is entertaining for at least half of it, and the two main characters are very well written. But on the downside, I do think that there's a lot of contrivances in play here, and a lot of the film just feels like a remix of so many other better films. But I definitely say give it one watch. At the bare minimum, you should do that. Right, let's see how this all translates into a score from the Bag of Terror. So we've got 1, 2, 3 Michael Myers carving knives out of 5. That just about finishes things off for today. But before we go, I think it's time for a reading update. So I did a lot of reading on my recent holiday, and I finished, among other books, Red Rabbit by Tom Clancy. This is a Jack Ryan novel, so I'm trying to read these in chronological order. So this was my third. I'd previously read Without Remorse and Patriot Games, and now I've moved on to this one. This is concerned with a plot where the American government are trying to get a defector out of Russia, and there's this whole plot to kill the Pope. It feels kind of weird reading this book at the moment because of the war in Ukraine. I definitely feel like I learned a hell of a lot about Russia from reading this novel. I know that this was set in like the early 80s, but I don't feel like Russia has changed an awful lot in the last 40 to 45 years. So it was an interesting book from that perspective. I felt like I was learning a lot about geopolitics, not just reading a thriller kind of a thing. But I did like the book. I'd say that it's the worst of the three up to this point. It's too overlong. Like, God, this book drags itself out. It could be half the length and still tell the same story. But I think that's just Tom Clancy's writing style. He did have a tendency to do that. But I'm still up for reading more. I think the next one after this is the very famous Hunt for Red October. So I'll see how I get on with that one. But for now, I will end it here. Thank you for joining me for my review of Dangerous Animals, and I'll catch you all again next time. Bye-bye.